Hello, I'm the One Nerd, and today I'm going to look at this project I've been working on. I worked on it just for a few days. I wanted to see, I've been using Unity a bit more recently. My background's more JavaScript game dev. Obviously I've used Unreal Engine quite a lot before. I'm trying to familiarise myself a bit more with Unity. This is also done as just an experiment to see how difficult it would be to create a version of Tic Tac, which I've then adapted to, because it's October, just to be more like a Halloween version of it. But yeah, it's basically a version of the traditional Tic Tac or noughts and crosses. So for 2 players, first to get row of 3 wins the game. So fairly simple logic, and I'm going to just go over the game files, the scene files, and then obviously the code as well, bit too. I'm still learning a bit more about just C# in general in Unity, so it's a good opportunity for me just to familiarise myself more with that. Hopefully this will be quite interesting. I'll try and dive into as much as I can what I remember. I didn't really document the dev process, but yeah, hopefully you'll get the idea. Okay, so this is our main menu screen. So we've got the camera here. Attached to that is a canvas element. And then we've got a panel there which has got all the associated UI items. So we've got the description of the game, the different fonts, the actual title of the game, which is Witch Monk Toe instead of Tic Tac Toe, just because it sounds sort of similar, but it's not Tic Tac Toe. The description, and obviously got the buttons which I've added here, which have got the text underneath. We've of course got the terrain here, so I just created a terrain to do that, and then just extended it. So yeah, just did that basically. How that looks when you're in game is like this. So yeah, got some basic animations running on the models. The models are just, I created those with the Fuse software, which is quite a nice, easy to use 3D character creator software. It's not that advanced, but you can get something really fast going for like prototypal work, so that's what I did with this. And then I've just added animations for Mixamo, which is very good, definitely for, like I said, just creating prototypal animations. So these guys have just got these characters, the dancing monk and the witch, have got animations which just loop, which are set. Animations are a bit funny. I'm still getting used to the animation system in Unity. It's nothing that complicated, but it's more like getting used to how it works exactly. So I've got an animator there, and I've got an animator. Obviously the animation that are associated with the model, and then the actual controller, which I can just show you that quickly. It's very simple. We've got the state, the entry, and then I don't know if I had to do this, but I just added a placed a boolean basically, so that if it does that, it just repeats. And then on entry, it just triggers that. And that seemed to work. Like I said, I'm still sort of getting more familiar with Unity's animation system, but once you get the hang of it, like, it seems to be fairly intuitive. That was an area that I had a few little problems with. Anyway, that's not the actual game. That's the menu screen, and then I've also got the buttons here, which have got a script attached to them, which I'll show you quickly, which aren't doing anything that sophisticated. Basically, new game does what you imagine it would do. It opens a new scene with the game board, and exit just exits the game, but I'll show you those quite quickly. Don't want to open them in VS Studio, so I'll just open them in this. Okay, so this is just nothing too complicated going on here, right? It's the button exit click. And we've got button click exit, C# file, which then is a little debug log, which is the same as the JavaScript constant logs a comment back to the debugger. Quits the application. If you're in Unity, it just does that. That's it. That's that one. It's pretty simple, right? That's attached to the exit button. And then if I go to the other one, go to here. This is for changing the scene. Again, just scene manager, and then it loads the scene with the name of the scene. Obviously, I've had to import in Unity Engine scene management now. Anyway, that's that part. Game. Let's have a look at our game board, because this is where most of the actual game is, right? So again, I've got a canvas set up on the camera, underneath the camera here, as you can see previewed there. Got the canvas, which has got the place where we've got the text to display the turn, so whose turn it is. And we've got then two little text items here. So we've got text items here, turn, and then the switch, which is populated programmatically with whose turn it is. So if it's circle's turn, which is the which, it says which. If it's, or circle or whatever, if it's the monk's turn, which is the same as a cross, which is obvious, right? Then its monk is displayed instead. That's obviously empty at style at the start of initiation. And if we go down to our actual scene, let's bob down here. So I did another terrain again. Obviously the board starts off empty at the start of gameplay. I've got two little ref models here, which are just basically copied in programmatically. Not 100% sure if that's the best way of doing it. I was trying to get it so it loaded in prefabs, but I'll go into that later. So yeah, I'll create this little terrain. Let's have a look at it playing during play. It's obviously got a bit of sound too, so there's some sound. A little bit of a camera panning down, so there's a bit of a, like. So that's how the game functions. It's not networked. Like I said, I only did this over 2 days. So when I was actually creating this, the first thing I did, obviously, was create the board, because that's, that's where you're going to be doing, that's where most of the gameplay occurs. So I just created a plane. I think it's a plane. Yes, plane. Textured it up a bit. I've got some textures of wood, so I thought that'd be quite cool. Coloured it a bit. So these are just materials that I've added there. So just the material. Nothing too complicated, yeah. And then just created some box cube meshes, and then applied a filter there with wood. Was the material? No, what was the material? Or whatever it was, lines. But it's basically the wood texture I applied there. That's that. I've got some sounds. In terms of sounds, it's just music that auto plays. So I think it's here. Yeah. And that just auto plays automatically. What's probably useful to look at here, that's there you got the witch laughing, some other audio assets there. The game controller is where most of the logic is, so that's the actual logic that drives the game. And that is all programmatically driven, right? So we've got some references to whose turn it is, the actual turn number. Text Mesh Pro is a reference to this. Text Mesh Pro is the turn, so you can switch whose turn it is when you're actually playing. And then yeah, I've got the actual models which are useful. They're in the list there. Play models, 2 list elements, and then I've got the reference to these little guys, the models, and that's so that when I click on the whichever the square it is, which I can actually show you here. So these are all listed with appropriate names. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right. So yeah, because when I was looking this up, I've done this in JavaScript before. Obviously, Tic Tac Toe is quite good because it's fairly simple gameplay. Like you've only got quite a limited amount of winning requirements. I think in total it's what. Well, I mean, for the basic ones, it's 6. And then for the draws, I think it's 9, basically. 9 different gameplay outcomes, including draws, I think. I'm not exactly sure if that's right, but anyway. So yeah, there's the board there. There's the actual physical board underneath that hierarchy. Got lights, obviously, blah, blah. Buttons themselves, which are, if we go to the game controller, which again is where all the gameplay logic is, the actual those buttons are in the gameplay controller here. So there's a list with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and obviously as it's a list or an array, it's from 0 to 8 in the actual index, but 1 to 2 to 9. 1 to 9 there. There's a reference to the camera, gameplay state, so is the game over or not? Well, the end game state really. And then I've also, because I added in the descending code of the camera at the start, there's a little bit of some settings there, so we can trigger that off. Probably now it's time just to look at the gameplay logic. That's where most of obviously this game is, because it's I've tried to do it all C#, and that's this, and that's what all these script attributes are referencing. So we're going to have a look at that next. This is probably the main meat of the video really. I'm going to try my best to go over the actual code on how this gameplay controller works. It's 300 lines. There might be some bloat here, I don't know. I did it over 2 days, so I did it quite fast. As I'm not that familiar with Unity and C#, I use ChatGPT in places to help for a lot of this, but it was sort of a back and forth in terms of like actually creating the scripts themselves. Like for some things like the camera position, I did just generate that, I've got to admit, entirely with ChatGPT, but for other things it was more just like a back and forth. You know, things like this are fairly obvious how to do them. You know, switch states, blah 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 blah. Anyway, let me go on up and try and describe this as best as I can from the top. So you've got the Unity engine, that's for text, TM Pro. Scene management's obviously for managing scenes, so being able to switch back, because I needed to implement so that you could press the escape key and then go back into the scene. And then we've got all our global variables here, so we've got public, turn it is, town, and then you will have seen all those actually referenced in the Unity file. And then you can, for play models for example, are the 2 references to the cross and the circle, the witch and the monk. And those are populated then in the game engine itself, in the editor. Spaces is just an array for game object of type array for the cubes that you click on, right, which is quite an important key fundamental part. And then the reference to the main camera, the different states of the so that's for tracking. Is the so when you got the 9x9 board with the cubes in or the spaces, you need to know if there is nothing in there, if there's a cross, and if there is a circle, which, you know, in any version of Tic Tac you create, that's obviously going to be essential, is that you've got a way of tracking that state in real time. Game over is simply a boolean just to say if the game's over. Obviously the initial state set to false. That's camera stuff, so I won't worry about it too much. And then just some references for sounds. So we've got the start method function, that checks if the camera's not null, but basically first. Then we set that initial position. Again, this is, like I said, this is the camera stuff that I just added with ChatGPT because I thought it was like a little bit of an afterthought really. But yeah, it just sets this sets the starting vector for the camera position, and then transforms it basically. That applies a transform, which I think is somewhere further down. We've got our update function. So all that happens actually on this is check if the escape key's been pressed. So similar to that script I did before, it basically just checks if the key down is key code, the escape key basically. Only really supports keyboards at the minute. I could obviously enhance it, but this is like a test, so I haven't bothered with that. So yeah, it just loads that menu scene. Nothing new there. This again is just the camera descending code. So we've got a float there. And then start positions assigned to... I'm not going to go over that too much actually, to be honest, because like I said, that's not really a core fundamental part of the game. But you probably get most of that. That sets the initial value of the game to game text to cross there. And then we run the actual game setup, which we'll go into further down. We've got... Yeah, this is the logic for switching turns. So switch turn is if the game isn't over, then just switch the turn basically. So it's that simple if else. So the who turn well, basically switches it between 1 and 0, 1 being circle, 0 being cross, and then it plays the associated sound. And then there's some updates we have to do there, which we'll go into further down. Play sound, just literally just play sound, one shot clip. Update models. Okay, so this is where I go into the actual initiating the prefab, so then adding the 3D models on a click. So this is a bit more, this is actually the area which took me a bit of a longer time to figure out. Like I said, I don't have a great amount of familiarity with Unity, so a bit more of a learning curve. The actual, what I wanted to do, I knew what I wanted to do basically, but I was just figuring out how to do it, because like I said, I'm not really a C# whiz, but I did manage. So we've got a for loop here, which checks through all the spaces, the items in the spaces, which if you remember is the actual wooden little cubes. Checks for all those, and then it instantiates prefab. There's a click handler there. It checks for whichever array item is currently in the loop, and it gets a component called instantiate prefab on click, and then it basically adds the model according to whose turn it is, which is 0 or 1, right, if you remember. So though you might not understand all of that, right, I think the basics of what it's doing probably makes sense, hopefully. Then we've got the check win condition. So obviously this is a hugely fundamental part of the code, and I think this should make sense, right? So you've got win conditions, you've got an integer. I don't actually know what that does. Some of this actually refined a bit with ChatGPT, so it like the basic logic for this is pretty easy, but to understand anyway. But again, it's just like, yeah. So you've got the different patterns for wins there, based on positions, and then we do a for loop. We've got this win patterns, which is yeah. Check that. Well, the main thing to remember here, in fact, really, is that, so we've got space states, which remember above is storing the, is there a 0, is there 1, is it empty, is there a monk, or is there a circle, and it's checking those basically. So there's a bit of a comparison here. So we've got A and B. This checks all this stuff, which are defined here. So we've got 1, 0, 1, or 2, right? So there's the win patterns. It's checking that. If they all equal up to 1 in this pattern of arrangements, then crosses win, and we've got that function that's setting the crosses to win, or the circles win. And then obviously, once the win's detected, set the game over to true, which is above was a boolean, set initially to false, disable the spaces so that you can't click on them, and that's it. At the minute, the actual end of gameplay loop isn't that sophisticated. There's no funky graphics or anything. It just literally says one or the other one, or a draw state has occurred. But you could obviously do that if you want to. You can press escape just to go back to the menu and start again. That's the draw. That's checking for the draw state. And then that sets it to draw, and vice versa. This is quite an important one actually, so I'll go over this. Game setup, because that was called above if you recall. So the who turn initializes to 0. The turn count initializes to 0. That doesn't need to be there twice actually, probably. No, maybe it does actually, but yeah, the game over is set to false again, so we reset the game loop. The game boolean, basically, if it started. Add a collider to the cube in spaces, so the actual little spaces, and add it if it's not already there, so that's good. It's a little bit of checking that there is actually a collider on that object before starting, because nothing will work without that. And then yeah, this is an important thing actually. So this checks that if no prefab's already been added in that space. So say for example space 1, this is the lowermost to the bottom right. Then yeah, it just checks. This basically makes it so that it doesn't then add multiple characters, because when I first started doing this, obviously one of the first things I had to fix was the fact that if you click multiple times, it doesn't stop adding. So yeah, I had to fix that. Let's assign the prefab based on whose turn it is. Like I said, that switch between 0 and 1 for monk and circle and witch. It sets the spawn point of that new model to the cube's position, so that actually is in the center more or less of the cube, if that makes sense. It passes that reference, which is won't worry about that too much, but assigns the space index for tracking, and then then I also update the material as well to red or blue, because I just think that's a nice little visual thing. Set text, this has been referenced a few times. Literally just gets the text mesh pro, which is a text object that was referenced above, and updates it to whatever that's set to. Otherwise, if there's an error, it just debugs it. It says, gives you a little message back. Set space state, so again, it takes a parameter of space index and the player reference. And then we've got all that. Turn count goes up. Check for the win conditions. Switch the term if the game isn't over. So it's more just gameplay state stuff. Disable spaces is quite important, like I said. So it does a for each loop, for each space. So each time there is the 9x9 grid, for each one of those, disable click handling so that people can't click on it. That's there. So it just goes through all those and checks that. Then we've got clear text, which is what you'd assume. It just clears the text into empty text field. Sorry, I'm trying to get this through this quite fast. That's why I'm taking it fast. Instantiate prefab on click. We've already seen that referenced a lot, actually. Now, I did have to get help for this. This was the toughest part of the code, and yeah, I wrote this and then rewrote it. Got ChatGPT to help me a bit with it, and then but yeah, this is the toughest part, really. Mostly, I think, due to my unfamiliarity with Unity and C# scripting and just how that functions, basically. But from what I understand, this is the reference to the prefab we're going to instantiate to the actual game objects, which would be the cross or the circle. That's a reference to a spawn point, so a vector, I assume. And then we've got the GameController object, which is a reference to the GameController. Space index, so that's the index of the space in the list items of spaces. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So 0 would be the first one, 1 would be the second, for example. There's a reference to the space for the color changing, whether it's been instantiated or not, which is obviously false. And then we've got the mouse down event. So when the player actually does play the click the cube, what happens then? So if there's no prefab instantiated, so if it's not been created basically, and if the game isn't over, then a bunch of other checking as well, and then instantiate it. So this is saying instantiate, and then we get the prefab which we want to create there, which will be the one of the witch or the monk, right? The actual position, so the spawn point position, which is a reference to that. The rotation, and then we set it to true because it has been instantiated. I run the method for changing material color, which is probably look down a bit further down. We're almost there now. And then we simply set the space state. So that's setting the space, the reference, the index is going to be changed to a 0. It's going to check, first it's going to check if it's a 0. If it is, let me gather my thoughts. Based on whose turn it is, it will change it to either a 1 or 2. That's a comparison there. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I jumbled the explanation that a bit. And then we got a error log. Then we've got a few error things there. And finally, we've got change material color. So that basically changes the color there. So you got the material color, which is a reference to the actual spaces. Yeah, that space renderer there is getting the component of the renderer on the cube, and it simply changes the material color to a color of red or blue based on who the player is, and that's all the code. Just why I'll do that, just because why not. So it's about 300 lines. Hopefully you got most of that. Obviously it's quite a lot for me to explain, and I tried my best, but it's quite a lot to go through actually, but hopefully that mostly makes sense. It's quite a fun project to work on. Probably better ways of doing it, probably more efficient ways of doing it, but I just wanted to try it out. Obviously because I'm quite new to interactive 3D and Unity as well, it's a bit of a learning curve, but it's a good project to work on, I think, because it's Tic Tac Toe is a fairly simple game. The gameplay mechanics aren't too complicated, and like I said, I got this working in about 4 or 5 hours. So yeah. Anyway, that's that.